started in, it was about 2003, started with a course that I took, just a professional development course that I took that was focused on HTML and web page design for a teacher. The course was detailed in its learning of HTML and web design, but it was also how can you use this in your classroom. And with that, I started to design web pages, started to design things for each individual class, and it started with just an informational repository for my classes, schedules, curriculum, when's the test going to be, those kinds of things. And then I started to, it was around 2006, 2007, I started to ask myself, what could I do to get things that the learning resources that are on the web to my students using this platform. And so 2007 through 2009, I started, that's when I was doing my master's work. And my master's work was all directed towards technology in the classroom. My final project was to be an action research in the classroom. And so 2009, fall of 2009, what I did then was I had 3 classes that I was teaching in my traditional manner, and then 2 classes that I developed an online unit for. And so I basically blended 2 classes and compared them to my traditionally taught classes. We did some significant work. We did a covariant, their unit scores on this unit exam back to their standardized test scores. But what it did show was that blended learning was another effective way to teach. It was perhaps another tool for our toolbox. And so realizing that and enjoying teaching that way, in 2009, 2010, I started to do a unit here or there, which began to blossom. And then December of 2010, January of 2011, I was going to have an extended absence, and realized this in August, that was going to take me out of the classroom for 3 weeks to 6 weeks. I wasn't sure. So went to my administration. I need a sub. I'm going to be gone for maybe 6 weeks. I need a science sub, somebody that can take care of my students and help them learn so that I can walk out of here and be with my family. Science subs are hard to come by. Early on, in probably mid-October, I was going to have to do something to engage my kids in learning so that I could go be with my family. And so I produced 2 blended units that were to be done while I was in Iowa City with my daughter. There were times when I was dealing with things by email in Iowa City, but during that time, what I realized when I got back was my students were learning. I wasn't anywhere to be found. There were people that were guiding them and helping out, but it had worked, and it worked well. And so that spring, I made the decision that in the fall of 2011, so for the school year 2011, 2012, I would have every unit having a blended online component with it. And I've been teaching that way ever since. I see it as being another very effective way to teach. And I also see it as being a necessary direction that education is going to be taking. Professional development is going to go this direction. Corporate training is going to go this direction. When my daughter was, she's a 3rd year now at Wartburg College, and when she took chemistry, virtually all of the paper pencil stuff that I did as a chemist, my very short career as a chemist, all the paper pencil stuff that I did was all online. And so every answer was, is this answer 3.0 grams per mole, or is it 3.00 grams per mole? It really forced the students to do the work. That whole concept of, 1 hour in the classroom and lecture versus 2 hours outside of class, I never did that as an undergrad. But now this system forced the student to do that work, and the instructor could see who had been doing the work, who hadn't. It was just a very effective way to get learners to go through the process of learning. And because of that, I wanted to bring that to my students. After my master's degree, I went on and completed a certificate in e-learning and online teaching, which was focused on universal design, which was very helpful. I saw things about what I was bringing to students that how does this work for a hearing impaired student? How does this work for a sight impaired student? And really made me realize that there were some things that were deficient in the system I was using. So that graduate certificate was significant in helping me to properly formulate digital formative assessment and cause that to guide my students where I wanted them to go. Usually fire, chaos, there's well, you'd see 7 fish tanks, you'd see students doing all sorts of things. One of the neat things about blended learning in a science classroom is it lets the students work at their own pace, and that allows them to do the lab activities in a way that lets them do things thoroughly. So if we have 7 lab stations set up around the room, and I can tell the kids that the next 3 days, if you finish these lab stations, you can work on our online component. If you need 3 days to finish these 7 lab stations, then you've got to work on the online materials outside of class. And it just gives me a great deal of flexibility. So if you walk into my classroom, you might see, you would definitely see myself, my co-teachers, our associates working right next to kids. You would see students up and around the room finishing lab activities, finishing lab stations, things like that. I think the thing that I'm the most pleased with, the most proud of, is every co-teacher, associate that comes into my room is expected to be a teacher, is expected to interact with those kids, and you would see an adult with a chair pulled up next to a young person and having conversations about their learning. We've set goals, we reflect on those goals regularly, and we've also, just in the last year, we have focused on the productive struggle. What does it mean to struggle? What's the first thing I do? Right? And we've also, through the help of one of my co-teachers, we've also made a list of this is what I don't do. So if I'm struggling, that's when I don't. If you're struggling, this is what it means to struggle. Okay, don't go to the restroom. Don't go to your locker. Don't bring up a game on your Chromebook. What's the next step, and what's the next step to avoid? The 2 buzzwords about blended learning are pace and place. So the students could possibly work at their own pace, and certainly they've got everything online. So they can work at the local coffee shop, they can work at the Hy-Vee deli, they can work at home, public library. All of those things, I think, point back to the greatest advantage of blended learning and having an online component to our learning system is that it gives the students agency. It gives the students ownership. This is when I'm going to do this. This is how I want to do this. I also have, in my system, I will have several types of resources with the same information. So if I need them to learn about natural selection, there might be a simulation, YouTube video, digital text, there's online text. I may have 4 or 5 different ways. I also have been doing mini lecture, just screen captures of me telling them what's going on. So the students have 3 or 4 different avenues to learn that material. So, and I'll purposely label those things. For example, any kind of screen capture that's me doing a mini lecture, I label that as a Mugan Explains. So if I have students that want to avoid that, they know that that's not their deal. If I have students that want to hear me explain it, that's the first thing they go to. So it gives them voice and choice in how do I want to learn this, and it gives them multiple options. Hey, I listened to Mugan explain this and I don't get it yet. So what do I have to, what's the next step? What do I have to do in addition to that in order to understand it? Other benefits that I've noticed, I've really enjoyed how it's used our co-teachers and our associates. For me, there's a lot of traditional school excuses that are eliminated. There's no papers to lose. We're losing a lot of excuses in terms of I couldn't find that, couldn't get that, didn't have access to that. We do have some students in the Waverly-Shellrock area that have some wireless connectivity issues, especially the rural kids that are a little further out. But those kids know that if they've got to work on something that's online, they've got to work on that, at school or a public library or a coffee shop. They just work around it. The other benefits that I would point to, I had a student say to me a couple of years ago, I like that you treat me like I can learn something on my own. That was huge for me. That the students feel empowered by how we're teaching. It's irreplaceable. It's given me an avenue to keep learning, adjusting, reflecting, and improving my practice. There's always a new little trick or there's a new app, there's a new resource out there that I can use with my teaching, with the online component of my teaching. That's something I need to learn about. Most recently, it's been, for us in the science world, the Amoeba Sisters have been huge with their cute little drawings of science concepts. Edpuzzle has been significant. So there's always going to be something to learn and to improve. And I think that's helped to recharge my desire to teach. It really has. And so to be in this 20 years at WSR, 28 years total, and to realize that before the next school year starts, there's more to be done than I have time to do, but I'm excited to do it. That's pretty good stuff. Especially in some of my classes that don't have an online component yet. I teach a freshman, sophomore biology class, but I also teach an advanced placement biology class, and I teach another class that we call Science Issues. It's contemporary issues with a science flair. I would like to build online components for those classes as well. I think it's necessary, and I'm at a point where I can build those things much more quickly and much more effectively, so it's time to do that as well. I've got a couple ideas. I would like to get an Edpuzzle for every concept, not necessarily every detailed concept, but I need an Edpuzzle for ecology. I need an Edpuzzle for evolution. I need an Edpuzzle for some of the bigger umbrella topics. But I also have, this is an idea that Mr. Willenborg and I came up with. He's one of my co-teachers, that we're referring to as, from the gamers world, we're referring to it as cheat codes. If I have a digital formative assessment that's guiding students towards this learning, and there's a concept that every kid always has trouble with, I want to have some sort of digital support that can be a cheat code for that. To say, I'm not understanding geochemical cycles in ecology. Could we have some sort of screen capture simulation? What could we use to answer specifically some of those questions that students have had over the last several years, that they've had over and over and over, to increase their ability to help themselves rather than to wait for us as instructors? I would tell them it's much easier to start it in 2019 than it was in 2004, 2005. Basically, you need three things. You need an online presence of some sort, and we have that so much more readily available to us. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if you weren't able to make your own website, even a wiki or something of that nature, having an online presence was difficult. Now we have an online presence with a Google Doc that has hyperlinks in it. It's just easier. But we need an online presence of some sort. I think one of the keys is digital formative assessments that give the students immediate feedback, and start there, start small, take perhaps one of the more information-laden units or topics and lay it out and see where it goes from there. Without being the source of information in the room, it's me interact with the students and co-teachers and associates much more. I know more about my kids. I know their names quicker. Those parents that at parent-teacher conferences, you can see the question on their face. If you're not teaching in front of the room, if you're not correcting papers, what are you doing? And it's a good question. But I would suggest that if I've got a room full of kids that are doing a great job with dealing with the information that I'm giving them an opportunity to learn in online fashion, if they don't need me as an information source, I'm going to do my best that day to be a relationship builder. Jimmy, how are you doing today? You don't need help with your science? How was the soccer game? Okay. Oh, you're not playing soccer anymore? How come? I know which of my students has recently been put on probation. I know which of my students has a mom that has some health issues. I know a student that is the cousin of a former student that got killed in a motorcycle accident. And those connections just didn't happen without me being able to pull up a chair and sit next to a kid for 2 or 3 minutes and ask them how their day's going. It allows me to be a learner with them, but instead of learning content, I'm learning about them. That part of what we're doing is why I'm in this, but it's re-energized my teaching.